Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Manny Castro. I'm the Technical Services Specialist here at Siegel Scientific, authors of the BarTender software. In today's webinar, we will be building a file integration using print command script. So now for anyone who is new or unfamiliar with print command script, we'll also be discussing what it is exactly and how it's used. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we actually begin to discuss the specific integration we'll be building today, I'd like to quickly cover three of the main components that sort of make up your integration. At this point in the process, of course, your label's already designed and you're ready to integrate it with your system or other piece of software. The three main things that I usually like to take into account are the trigger, the data, and the actions that will be executed. So the trigger is going to be what initially triggers the integration to occur. It is pretty much what we're waiting for to execute whatever you have programmed in Integration Builder. So some examples of this are a file integration, a database integration, or a web integration. Moving down to the second part of it, the data is going to be the format or the structure of the data that's coming in or over in the trigger itself. There are several and really almost endless options as far as how the data can be structured or the format of it. The important thing is just to make sure that the data structure is consistent. So for example, if we decided to build an integration using print command script or XML, we'll want to make sure that we comply with that syntax or structure moving forward from that point on. The third option is the action. The action is what you would like or need executed or done once the trigger has occurred and the data is passed. With BarTender, of course, one of the actions that almost ends up being selected is to print a document in one way or the other. However, there are a lot of other actions such as sending a response back to your system, parsing data, or you can write back to a database or to a file even. So we'll see how all this kind of comes together in the live demonstration portion of today's session. But it is pretty important to understand those three main concepts, not just for this integration, but really for any integration that you tackle moving forward. Also incredibly important is to understand that a lot of these are interchangeable. For example, if you have a web integration, you can pass print command script or CSV data or XML data and then execute a print action. It's really just a puzzle that you can put together and just piece together the three components to get the integration that you really need. Today specifically, we'll be building an integration with a file trigger and the data coming in through that file integration. So we're going to be dropping a file into a directory somewhere. The data coming in will be print command script, and the action that we'll be executing so happens to be either print or print command script. Today we're doing executing print command script. So let's go ahead and actually quickly talk about what is print command script. For those that have been with BarTender since prior of our latest version, which is BarTender 2016, you'll recognize it as Commander script. So now it is fully backwards compatible, but for those of us that are new or just now tackling print command script for the first time, what it is pretty much is a set of written instructions or custom syntax that you can configure your system to produce that will allow you to dynamically set items such as the label we need, its data, or the printer, and the printer actually, excuse me. On the screen to the right, you'll see a simple example of what this looks like. In the trigger file, the basic layout is the header is open and closed by %BTW and then % and %. And your syntax lies in between those two opening and closing headers. So now below that one character turned down, you'll see all the field names and then all the data. So this is going to be everything that's associated with data sources on your actual label format. Okay, so now that we kind of have a basic understanding of the objective of today's session and have a little introduction as well to print command script, let's go ahead and actually start building our own integration here. So what I'll go ahead and do now is I'll open up BarTender here for you, and we'll see a label come up. I previously designed this label, and I'm just going to quickly show or demonstrate what the relationship is as far as how we get those fields associated with the data sources on the label. So first of all, we'll go into the database connection, and we'll notice that we have a database connection to a sample CSV file. So you'll need that CSV file to exist somewhere. Generally, I put it in the same directory as the BarTender document itself. And when we make that connection, what it gives us is the ability to link all these database fields to data sources on our actual label. So now because I have that connection made already, I can go into something like my barcode here, go to the data source itself, and I can link it up to that field. So now that's important because remember that trigger file coming in contains those same fields. So what that does for us is it maps everything out so that we're able to associate everything through the integration. Okay, so we'll go ahead and for now, we can actually just minimize or close out BarTender. And the next tool that we'll want to bring up is going to be Integration Builder. So this is where we really start to actually build our integration. This is going to be the first thing you see when you first open it. This is kind of your welcome splash screen. And what we'll want to do first is, if this is a new integration, and today it is, we'll want to create a new integration. The dialog that comes up is going to be to select the integration method. So now if we remember, that's the first component of the three main ones from the slide. So our integration method is going to be File. We'll want to go ahead and select File and hit OK. The way that a file integration works, of course, is that we're watching or we're monitoring a directory somewhere. So that could be a local directory or a network directory. In this case, I've ahead of time created a scan folder for us. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to copy and paste that scan folder because we are going to use it in the integration in a moment. So here we have the integration builder. So this is where you're actually going to design everything. Where the screen first opens up is in the properties of your file detection here. And then you also see your actions down here. So the way that I like to think about it for the integration to the actions is this is going to be the cause and this is going to be the effect. So what triggers the integration and then what actions do you want executed. So right away you'll notice obviously that we see the folder to scan. So we'll go ahead and we'll paste the folder to scan directory. So remember that's the one that we just had up on the screen a moment ago. And then we're going to go through and we're going to set all the properties of our trigger of the file detection. So this is going to be what triggers the integration to happen, right? The next major thing to take note of is going to be the scan method. So this is going to be if we want it to be immediate or we want to pull this directory. We'll leave it on the default of notifications and polling for this one. The next thing down that's very important is going to be the file pattern. So by default, you see that it has a wildcard of the asterisk, so that means anything with the .dat extension. Today, we'll probably want to change that to a .text, since that's the extension of the trigger file sample that I still have. So now you can also make, though, this file pattern be a specific file name or a prefix or a suffix of a particular file name. So it doesn't have to just be the extension, but the majority of the time this is the way that it's used. So that's the directory that we're scanning and that's the extension that we're scanning in order to pick up that file, grab the data, and execute all your actions. So we'll scroll down in this properties page here and we'll get to the minimum and maximum file size. If that's necessary, this is where you can use it. And that's mainly used in FTP type environments. And then the next major thing that we need to pay attention to is the actions after detection and the actions after failure. So actions after detection, we can either opt to rename the extension of that file, or we can set it to delete or move the file. Today we'll go ahead and we'll leave it on rename, and we'll set the new extension to .old. Next is the actions you want after failure. So here we have rename the file, and we rename it to .failed. Since we're just testing or setting everything up now, let's go ahead and leave it on that. But we also do have the option to either delete or move the file to another directory upon failure. For input data, we can go ahead and leave it on the default for this integration. And we are going to use a variable in our integration, but we're only going to use one of them, and we can discuss that shortly, what variables are specifically. And then we'll move down into our actions. So this is going to be what's actually executed when the trigger file is dropped into a directory. We have by default the print document action, which is not what we need today. So what we're going to do is we're going to mouse over it and X out of it. Then we're going to add a new action, go to print, and select print command script. Our action is created, and you'll notice right away, one of the things to notice is that you are able to rename your action. So if you have multiple print command scripts, maybe they're going to different facilities or different areas of your facility, you can name each one independent of each other. And then also, you can set conditional actions to occur. So under certain scenarios or under certain circumstances, even from based on the data coming in, you can build an expression and this action be conditionally executed. So today we're just going to leave it on run. Now the next big thing that we want to make sure that we do is that we want the source of our print command script to be a variable, and specifically event data. So whenever you see event data, well, that variable in Integration Builder, that's going to be the data coming in through the integration. So that's regardless of if it's a web integration or a database integration, or in today's case, a file integration. That's the actual data that we're putting through that file. So we'll want to make sure it's on event data. So now we do have a list of other variables that are available to us, but we're not going to be using them for this type of integration. Moving down, the next thing to take note of is to check or uncheck the box for prompt for data input. So for example, if you have a label that has a data entry form on it or something alike, you'll want to make sure you check that box, because remember, we are running as a service. And because we are running as a service, everything comes up in the background and there's no UI or person there to go ahead and click on it to continue forward. So we'll go ahead and we'll leave that check for now. And then the next thing really to take note of is if you want to verify if the print job has been processed before continuing. So essentially what that means, or what this option does, is if you select this bottom option, you're effectively running in single thread mode and you're verifying that the job went through completely. Whereas if you just want to queue out the print job and continue on to the next, you're not waiting for that job to complete. So we'll go ahead and we'll leave it on the default. We're just going to be testing a single trigger file here, so no need to take that into account. Then the last thing at the bottom here that we really need to pay attention to is the user account. So now, if we actually go back up to the integration, we can set a user account. So we can specify a username and password for the whole integration to run under. So if I were to set a username or password, I would take that username or password and everything would trickle down into all my actions and everything. And if, for example, I'm using a network directory, it would use those credentials to reach out and grab that resource. So now just how at the top here in the integration portion, just how we can set that for the whole integration, we can also set it on a per action basis. So we'll go ahead and we'll actually test this integration. I believe we've about completed setting it up. I'm going to click on my test tab. And then this is going to be your user interface when you're actually testing. So one thing to note here is this is a test environment. So if you close Integration Builder out, you're not running as a live production integration yet. So you want to make sure you take that into account. At the top here is where you can see the statuses of your file integration. So how many integrations have occurred? Is it stopped? Is it running? Any failures? Just your general information. In the middle, you see the actions. For this one, we only have a print command script action. And then where you're going to do a lot of your, troubleshooting and, just general observation of your integration is going to be in the output pane here down at the bottom. So at the moment, we don't have any messages. So let's go ahead and we'll start our integration. Note the start and stop button at the top right. We don't get any error messages thus far. We are now watching that directory, and it's ready for us to drop a trigger file into it. So I'm going to go ahead, and what I want to do is make this a little bit smaller just so that I can bring up my file, and we're just going to manually send this integration off for us here. So I'm going to go back into my BarTender files. Here I have my sample print command script. I'm going to go ahead and open that up just so we can get a visual on it. And we notice that up at the top we have all our instructions set, and then all the data below that. So that's going to be the data that actually prints on our label. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll close that out. That looks good. I'm going to copy it and paste it into my scan folder. And here is where we'll see if we did everything correct or not. I pasted it into my directory. It renamed it as .old, not .failed, so that's great. If we look through the messages, here we can see all the events that are occurring, and we get a successful print. So now one big thing to note is if you do happen to make a mistake, get an error message, anything like that, you can definitely double click on anything, on any of these events, drill into it, and then you have all the information, all the variables of that job. And then also you have just your general message. So if we did something wrong, we would be able to diagnose the problem from the screen here. Also, if you're not able to easily reprint or re-drop the trigger file or resend the web request, whatever it may be, you can also right-click and play back an action. And effectively what that's going to do is just resend the exact same job with the exact same data and everything. Okay, so at this point, we're actually happy with the integration. We've built it, we've tested it, and we're sure that it's printing. We saw it go all the way to our printer. So now what we have to do is actually deploy the integration, put it into production effectively. So let's go ahead and first of all, we're going to save it. And we're going to give it just any kind of name. Okay. And then we can actually, once saved, deploy the integration itself. So that's going to give us just yet another window to set up. So at the top, just working from the top to the bottom, we have the name and the description that we can provide. Under target servers, we can set the servers or PCs that we're going to be deploying this to. It doesn't have to be the local machine. And then we can also set a schedule. We're not in need of this integration as of yet. We can set it to deploy on a schedule. So let's go ahead and just give it a sample of some sort or sample name. And then we're going to hit OK. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up our administration console, and it will deploy the integration. So I can, at this point, safely close out Integration Builder, and we now have our sample integration running in the administration console. So let's go ahead and drill into here, and we'll see a familiar interface. Okay, so we have the same thing where when we stop and start the integration, we get our output. And what this means is that if we actually go out to our scan directory, let's just go ahead and rename this same trigger file to the other extension. We see that it's renamed to .old. We can see that we have one event. The events are going up, and that the label has successfully printed out for us. And then at this point, you have successfully built a file integration using print command script. Okay, I'll go ahead and go back to the slideshow here. We do have Tyler on the line. Any questions that may have been asked, we can go ahead and get them answered now. Tyler?
Yeah, we had a few questions come in here. The first one I think that will be good to answer. Are there any guides or training materials besides what we saw today on how to build an integration?
So if you are interested in getting other resources, we do have a support portal. That's generally the first step that I suggest as far as, to send any users that are wondering on how to build an integration or anything alike. And not just integrations, but, just other just general bartender topics. So the website is support.seagullscientific.com. And now, actually, if you're interested in this specific integration method, you can actually scroll down, I believe, and you can go all the way to integration. And you are going to click on print document using print command script. And then we even have a short little video for you and overview and then step-by-step instructions on everything that was just done during this session. And on the left as well, if you'll notice, you have other integration topics to explore as well.
We have another question here. Can you print multiple copies of a single record using command script?
Yes, you can. So for this, I'm actually going to go out and pull up my sample trigger file just so that we can get a visual on it. But essentially what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have a field up here, and you're going to want to name it, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be copy specifically, but it has to coincide with the copies field in your print dialog. And in your print dialog in BarTender, you can actually link this field to the copies. And for example, if I were to drop this right now and everything was linked, we would get 5 copies of that single record. And if you had multiple records, it would take the value from each one of those records.
Talking about the /r equals command in command script. They've heard different results on how that works. And they specifically asked, does the /r equals have to include rows that have data before % and %? So maybe if we can clarify what the /r command is used for.
Yeah, so what the /r is because remember, we're picking up this file and we're processing it as a flat file. So what that means is we're telling it to start on record 3. So the /r obviously means that it's the record upon which you're going to start processing the jobs. So now I have seen some mixed results as far as whether you want to set it to 3 or 4 or, so what's the correct one to set? The easy way to look at it usually is to remember, obviously, just trial and error, but also if you have the actual field names or no field names, that's when you would want to either minus it or plus it, because I've seen variants of it out there ranging from 2 to 3 to 4, as I mentioned. So those would be the 3 to try in my experience. And like I said, it depends on if you have headers for your fields or you're just passing the actual data itself.
There's also another question asked in relation to the /r equals command that says, do you always recommend headers? And I think you kind of touched on this already, but maybe if you want to answer that outright.
Yeah, so from just personal experience building integrations, I prefer having the header if at all possible from the other system. And the reason for that, it's not because it's any different in the syntax, the R3 or anything like that, but really more importantly, just to link the fields up. It just gives you much less homework, much less headache. And then also, this is a very simple and pretty straightforward example. If you get into a big integration that maybe has 50 or 60 fields and you're looking up a key where field 1 equals first name, field 2 equals last name, that can get a little bit confusing. So I would suggest if you can have the headers in the fields, go ahead and go for it and opt in for that. If you just can't, then obviously that's when you would need to use aliases or anything like or something like that.
So if the label is configured to expect headers, you need to put the headers after % and %. And does that affect the label design when you link to that sample text file, that sample CSV database we're looking at?
Okay, well, what I would suggest on that is pick one, so is it going to have headers? Is it not going to have headers? And then from there, basically, you should just be able to copy and paste the data. So for example, here's my sample CSV file. I can go ahead and edit this. I'm going to want to just copy and paste that into my data down here, everything below or after the percent and percent. So just go ahead and pick a path, make sure it matches in both sides, and I would say that's the easiest way to approach this.
Can you use a path to a CSV file in the batch file instead of writing the actual data in the trigger file?
I'm not sure I completely understand that. So if it's in reference to this down, or to the data down here.
So I think I understand the question, Manny. So the /d equals command, I think that's what they're referencing.
Okay, yeah. So, okay, I thought they were referring to after the percent end. Yeah, so the forward D equals is pretty much telling the software what database to use or where to source your data from. In our scenario, we used the trigger file name inside of the percents. In your scenario, what you would use is you would just give it the path to the CSV file. So if you do have the capabilities to push different CSVs from your system, that's what you would use. And what you would do is you would actually just delete everything down here. Well, it would never exist in the first place. And then in place of that, you would actually punch in the path and the name of your database there.
So how do we serialize a label using Commander? And I think this more relates to BarTender directly rather than, Integration Builder.
Right, so if we're talking about print command script and you do have a label configured to serialize, what you'll do is you will pass the S command in your Commander script as well. And that's going to be, so the one before it is the copies, and then this is going to be the serial numbers.
And maybe we can explain how the printing process is going to execute a trigger event in our integration today. That's how, is it immediately sending to the printer, which it is, or you want to expand on that a little bit, Manny?
Sure. So by default, if we remember, one of the options is going to be to immediately pick up a trigger file and it immediately process it out. So what I'm going to do now real quick is go ahead and open the integration that we just built right now. And I'm going to go to File Detection. And let's say we do want a polling behavior where we're only looking for that file every 5, 10 seconds, every minute. For whatever reason, if that's what's needed, I would go ahead and set it to polling only and then set the polling interval. Otherwise, if we want immediate printing, we'll want to just leave it on notification and polling, which is the default there. Once again, thank you very much for joining us.